Hidden God Stories, where God's mysteries are revealed.
The night was still, the kind of stillness that makes you hear your own heartbeat. A single candle flickered inside a small wooden house at the edge of town. The light trembled each time the wind slipped through the cracks of the window, but the woman kneeling beneath it never moved.
Hail Mary.
Her hands, frail and pale as winter branches, held a worn rosary. The beads, once polished and bright, were now faded from years of touch. Yet she held them with the same devotion she had on the first day she began to pray, 10 long years ago. Her name was Mary Ann Collins. The neighbors knew her as the quiet widow on Maple Street. Few ever saw her at the market or at church anymore. But heaven saw her every night, a mother, alone, whispering her way through pain with the one weapon she still believed in, the rosary. Each bead told a story. Each prayer carried a name, her son's. His name was David. And to Mary Ann, that name had become both her deepest wound and her greatest hope. She prayed for him the night he left home. She prayed for him the night she heard about his arrest. She prayed when the phone stopped ringing, when letters never came, when even the priest gently told her, maybe it's time to let go. But mothers don't let go. Not when love is real, not when heaven is listening.
Hail Mary.
Hidden God Stories, a place where faith meets mystery, and where the smallest prayer can open the greatest door. Tonight, we bring you a story about a mother, a son, and a rosary that changed everything. They said one rosary couldn't change a life until a miracle proved them wrong. It had started as a whisper, a small spark of faith in the darkness of grief. When her husband died, Mary Ann's world broke quietly. She never shouted at God. She simply fell silent. But in that silence, she found prayer. At first, the rosary was a way to keep herself busy, to fill the hours when loneliness pressed too heavily on her chest. But with time, it became something else, a rhythm, a conversation between her trembling heart and a God she refused to stop trusting. Each Hail Mary was not just repetition. It was hope, whispered into the wind, like seeds falling on unseen soil. 10 years passed. 10 years of unanswered prayers. At least that's how it seemed. Her son, David, had vanished into the city, swallowed by addiction and despair. The neighbors pitied her. Some even mocked her quiet faith. 10 years, Mary Ann. Don't you think God's made his decision? She would smile softly, her fingers still sliding across the beads, and reply, maybe he's still writing the ending. And then she would pray again. Each night at exactly 7 o'clock, she would light a candle and sit by the window. Through that window, she had once watched her husband leave for work, her little boy run through the yard, and later, that same boy walk away, too angry to look back. Now, through that same window, she looked toward heaven. The candlelight danced across her face, and her whisper filled the empty room. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Outside, the wind carried her voice into the night. Perhaps someone might have heard it, but most nights, only God did. And that was enough. Mary Ann never prayed for miracles. She prayed for mercy, for her son to remember who he was, for God to send someone, anyone, to reach him when she no longer could. Even as her body began to fail, her faith did not. The doctors said her heart was weak, but her prayer was stronger than ever. She told the nurse once, when the body weakens, the soul finally learns how to speak. And that night, she spoke. The candle flickered one last time. She looked at her rosary, each bead a memory of pain, patience, and love. If tonight is my last night, she whispered, then let this rosary find him. Let one prayer reach him where my hands cannot. Her voice trembled. Her eyes filled with quiet light. The room fell still, and somewhere far away, in a city alley under a cold, indifferent sky, a young man named David Collins woke suddenly. He couldn't explain why, but his chest felt heavy, his eyes wet, as if he had just heard someone call his name through the darkness. He didn't know that at that very moment, his mother's last Hail Mary was being carried heavenward, a prayer that would soon become a miracle. Because sometimes, the loudest miracles begin in the quietest prayers. In the small town of Willow Creek, the church bell rang every morning at 6. It was a sound that had once filled Mary Ann Collins' heart with peace. But after her husband's death, that sound became an echo. a memory of what life used to be. She had been 29 when her husband, Michael, was taken from her in a car accident. One night, one phone call, and everything she had built collapsed into silence. The bed felt too big, the house too quiet, the world too empty. For days she didn't speak. She sat by the window, hands folded, eyes fixed on the trees beyond the porch. Friends came, priests visited, but grief is a place where no one else can follow. And yet, in that darkness, something began to stir. One morning, the parish priest left a rosary on her doorstep. No words, no explanation. Just a string of beads and a small card that read, "When words fail, let your heart speak." She didn't know how to pray the rosary. She hadn't even opened her Bible in months. But that night, when the ache grew too heavy to bear, she picked it up. Her fingers found the cross, and for the first time since the accident, she whispered, "Our Father, who art in heaven." The words felt foreign at first, dry, mechanical, like stones rolling off her tongue. But with each prayer, something inside her softened. By the time she reached the last Hail Mary, her tears had finally fallen. It didn't bring back her husband, but it brought back her voice. As months passed, the rosary became her companion. Every morning she would sit by the window, beads in hand, whispering to heaven. The neighbors thought she was talking to herself, but she wasn't. She was learning to speak with God again, not as a theologian or saint, but as a broken woman searching for home. Grief, she discovered, doesn't destroy faith, it refines it. It strips away the unnecessary until all that's left is truth, the quiet kind that can't be shaken. Sometimes she would glance at her son, still a boy then, and wonder if he could feel the same comfort she did in those prayers. He would sit at the kitchen table, pretending to do homework, but she could see the sadness in his eyes. "David," she said softly one evening, "God hasn't left us." He didn't answer. He just stared at his notebook and muttered, "Then why did he take Dad?" She didn't know how to answer. So she did the only thing she could. She reached for his hand, and together they sat in silence. That night, she prayed not for herself, but for him. For the boy whose faith was beginning to crack. For the son she feared would one day drift too far to hear her voice. As the years went by, the ache became a part of her, like an old scar that no longer hurt, but never disappeared. She returned to the church choir, sang hymns with her eyes closed, and found a kind of peace in helping others heal. She became known in town as the woman with the rosary. Whenever someone lost a loved one, she was the first to visit, bringing food, a candle, and quiet prayers. People said her presence was comforting. Some even said her touch carried peace. But she always smiled and said, "It isn't me, it's the prayer." Still, deep down, she knew the real battle had not yet come. Her greatest test was still waiting. Not in the grave of her husband, but in the heart of her son. Because grief had taken her husband, but it was about to steal her child too. And for that, no mother's heart is ever prepared. David Collins was 17 when the world stopped making sense. One moment he was a boy, kneeling beside his mother during Sunday Mass, and the next, he was standing by his father's grave, staring at the fresh mound of earth that seemed too small to hold a lifetime of love. He didn't cry. He just stood there, jaw clenched, fists deep in his pockets, as if holding the pain in might somehow make it disappear. His mother's hand trembled on his shoulder. "God will give us strength," she whispered. But David pulled away. He already took enough. From that day on, he stopped praying. He stopped singing in the church choir. He stopped believing. Marianne tried to reach him, to talk, to listen, to heal. But grief is a wall that even love cannot always climb. She would find him in his room late at night, headphones on, drowning out her quiet prayers with angry music. Sometimes he wouldn't come home at all. Sometimes he would stumble in after midnight, eyes red, reeking of alcohol, and collapse onto the couch without a word. At first, she scolded him. Then she begged him. And finally, she prayed for him. Because what else can a mother do when her words no longer reach her child? The turning point came the day he turned 18. He packed a small bag, walked into the kitchen, and said, "I'm leaving, Mom." She froze. "Leaving? Where will you go?" "Anywhere that's not here," he muttered. "I can't breathe in this house. Every wall smells like prayers." "David," she said, but he was already at the door. She followed him onto the porch, the morning sun glinting on the silver cross around her neck. She wanted to say something, anything, but grief had stolen her voice again. So she pressed something into his hand instead. A small envelope, sealed with her initials. "Keep it," she whispered. "Just keep it close." He nodded without looking at her. Then he walked down the dirt road, past the mailbox, past the church steeple, and into a world that would soon swallow him whole. City life welcomed him like a false friend. At first, it was thrilling. The noise, the freedom, the illusion of control. He worked odd jobs, shared cramped apartments, and learned how quickly a good night could turn bad. He discovered that the world doesn't care about your faith or your pain, only what you can give and how much you're willing to lose. The parties, the drinking, the laughter, it all blurred together into one long escape. He told himself he was happy, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw his mother's face. The way she looked at him that morning, as if she already knew this road would break him. Years passed. The boy became a man, but not the man his mother had prayed for. At 21, he lost his job. At 22, his landlord kicked him out. By 23, he was living wherever he could, on couches in motels, sometimes under bridges. Addiction came quietly, not as a choice, but as a companion. It numbed the ache, blurred the memories, made the world quieter. He didn't pray anymore. He didn't even curse God. He just stopped believing he existed at all. One night, after a fight with a dealer, David stumbled into an alley and sank to the ground. Rain fell in thin sheets, washing dirt and blood from his hands. He leaned against the wall, shivering, and laughed bitterly to himself. "This is it," he said aloud. "This is what faith gets you." The sound of his voice echoed off the bricks, lonely and hollow. He reached into his jacket for a cigarette and felt something small and hard in the pocket. The envelope. He had forgotten it was even there. It was crumpled, damp from years of sweat and rain, but still sealed. He stared at it for a long moment, then tore it open with shaking hands. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a small silver cross. The paper read, "David, if you ever feel lost, this rosary will find you again. Love, Mom." He turned the cross over in his palm. The metal was cold, smooth, and it shimmered faintly in the dim light. For the first time in years, he felt something stir inside him. A memory, a whisper, a warmth. He didn't call it faith. He didn't call it God. He just called it hope. That night, as he lay in an abandoned building, he held the little cross in his hand. He didn't pray. But for the first time in a decade, he didn't feel completely alone. And somewhere, in a small house miles away, a woman named Mary Ann woke in the dark, her heart aching for reasons she couldn't explain. She reached for her rosary, kissed the cross, and whispered, "Wherever you are, my son, may this prayer find you." Because love, true love, always knows the way home. 10 years, 3,650 nights. That's how long Mary Ann Collins prayed for her son. Every evening, as the church bell tolled 7, she would light the same candle, kneel by the same window, and begin again. Her voice was softer now, her hands more fragile, her hair silver beneath the glow of the flame. But her faith was stronger than ever. Neighbors said she had lost her mind. Friends gently told her that maybe she should stop. But she couldn't, because when you love someone that deeply, prayer isn't a choice, it's breathing. Her days followed a rhythm that never changed. Morning mass at St. Jude's, tea with her neighbor, Mrs. Doyle, who worried more than she believed, and every evening, the rosary. She prayed it the way a musician plays a familiar song, slow, deliberate, each word filled with meaning. Sometimes she would whisper through tears. Sometimes she would fall asleep with the beads still tangled in her fingers. But she never missed a night. The rosary had become her language. Each bead was a conversation with heaven. Each mystery a memory of Christ's suffering and her own. The joyful mysteries reminded her of the day she gave birth to David, the way she had held him, tiny and perfect, and promised to teach him about love. The sorrowful mysteries mirrored the nights she cried for him, the agony of waiting for news, the scourging of loneliness, the carrying of a cross she could never set down. The glorious mysteries gave her hope, the resurrection, the triumph of life over death. And she believed, somewhere deep within her, that if Christ could rise again, so could her son. The luminous mysteries, her favorite, reminded her that light doesn't shout. It shines quietly through darkness until the darkness retreats. And so she kept praying. Sometimes she would talk to God like an old friend. "Lord," she'd whisper, "I know you're listening. I just wish you'd speak a little louder." Other times she would talk to the Blessed Mother. "You understand, don't you? You watched your son suffer too." And in those moments, she felt less alone. Once she asked her priest, "Father, do you think prayers ever get lost?" He smiled gently and said, "No, Marianne. Sometimes they just take the long road home." Years slipped by like beads through her fingers. The world outside changed. New neighbors, new buildings, technology that made people speak less and scroll more. But inside her little house, time stood still. The same candle, the same chair, the same rosary, its silver cross now worn smooth from her touch. Every night she whispered her son's name. Every night she told heaven she was still waiting. There were moments when the silence hurt, when it felt like praying into a void. But faith, she learned, isn't about hearing back. It's about trusting that someone is listening. One winter evening, as snow fell softly against the window, she knelt again. Her knees ached, her breath short, but she didn't stop. She looked at the empty chair across from her, the one her son used to sit in during dinner, and whispered, "Lord, wherever he is tonight, keep him safe. And if he has forgotten you, remember him for me." A single tear fell onto the beads. It caught the candlelight and shimmered like glass. For a moment, she thought she saw something, a faint flicker of light on the wall, as if the flame had grown brighter. But when she blinked, it was gone. She smiled anyway. "Even a whisper of hope is enough," she said softly. The years did not make her bitter. They made her gentle, like river stones, polished smooth by time and tears.
Thank you, doctor.
She became the woman everyone turned to when life fell apart. She would listen, pray with them, and send them home with a rosary of their own. Prayer, she would say, isn't about getting what we want. It's about becoming who we're meant to be while we wait. Sometimes she imagined David walking through the door again, older, changed, perhaps tired of running. She would picture him sitting at the table, head bowed, hands folded like when he was little. She never told anyone that she set a plate for him every Christmas, just in case. Faith, for her, wasn't denial. It was preparation, a readiness for the day when heaven would finally say, "Now." And so, the candle kept burning, the rosary kept turning. And the prayer, the same prayer that began the night she lost her husband, continued to rise, one whispered word at a time, toward a God who had never truly been silent. Because in every Hail Mary, he was already answering, not with thunder or voice, but with the quiet strength that kept her heart beating long after hope should have died. It began with the shortness of breath. At first, Marianne thought it was age catching up with her, a tired heart, worn out from years of prayer and waiting. But as weeks passed, her steps grew slower, and the walk from her chair to the kitchen felt like a climb up a mountain. One morning, she fainted by the window, the same place she had prayed every night for a decade. The candle fell, rolling across the floor, but the flame didn't go out. It simply burned quietly beside her, as if keeping watch. The doctor said her heart was failing. She listened politely, hands folded over her rosary, and nodded as if he were reading weather reports instead of her future. "You need rest, Mrs. Collins," he said gently. "No more long walks, no stress, no late nights." She smiled faintly. "I only walk to the window," she replied, "and the only thing I lift are prayers." He chuckled softly, not understanding. But she did. She understood perfectly. The nurse assigned to her case was a young woman named Claire, a kind soul with warm eyes and a quiet sadness of her own. She had stopped believing in God years ago, after losing her younger sister in a car accident. Faith, to her, was a language she had forgotten, but Marianne spoke it fluently. Each morning, Claire would arrive to find her patient already awake, the rosary in her hands, whispering as the first light of dawn touched her face. One day, curiosity got the better of her. "Why do you keep praying, Mrs. Collins?" she asked. "Doesn't it hurt to keep asking and never hearing back?" Marianne smiled. "Oh, my dear," she said softly. "Prayer isn't about hearing back. It's about knowing someone is listening." Claire didn't answer, but something in her chest tightened. As the days passed, the pain worsened. There were nights when the walls seemed to close in, and every breath felt like dragging air through fire. Yet even then, Marianne prayed. Sometimes, her voice was no more than a whisper, barely louder than the tick of the clock beside her bed. But each word was a heartbeat, steady, rhythmic, alive. When the pain peaked, she would press the cross of her rosary to her chest and murmur, "Jesus, you carried your cross. Let me carry mine a little longer." One evening, the nurse found her crying softly, not from pain, but from silence. "I've prayed for so long," she said through tears, 10 years, and not a word. Claire, unsure what to say, took her hand and squeezed it gently. "Maybe he's listening in ways you can't hear." Marianne looked up at her, eyes glistening but calm. "Yes," she whispered, "and maybe my son can't hear me either, but I still speak to him every night." That night, something changed. The sky outside was heavy with rain, and thunder rolled over the hills like the echo of ancient prayers. Marianne lay in bed, too weak to kneel, the rosary resting on her chest. Claire sat beside her, reading quietly until she heard a faint voice. "Claire?" "Yes, Mrs. Collins?" "Would you pray with me tonight?" Claire froze. It had been years since she'd prayed. The words felt distant, buried. I don't remember how." Marianne smiled faintly. "Then I'll remember for both of us." She began slowly. "Our Father, who art in heaven."
Oh my God.
Claire hesitated, then whispered the next line. "Hallowed be thy name." Their voices blended, one fragile, one uncertain, rising together into the quiet night. By the time they reached Hail Mary, Claire's tears had begun to fall. Something long buried inside her had begun to stir again. Not memory, not guilt, but faith. When the prayer ended, Marianne whispered, "Thank you, dear. It's good to be reminded that even the faithless can still find their way home." Later that night, after Claire had left, Marianne lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The house was silent, the candle's flame small but steady. She could feel her heartbeat slowing, each thump softer than the last. But she wasn't afraid. She had learned that fear dies where faith begins. She turned her eyes toward the small crucifix above her bed and whispered, "Lord, if my time is near, let my prayer reach him before I do." Her eyes drifted closed. And though her body trembled, her lips continued to move, quietly forming the words she had spoken every night for 10 years. Hail Mary, full of grace. Outside, the rain stopped, the clouds parted, and for a moment the moonlight fell gently through the window, illuminating her face, soft, peaceful, radiant, as if heaven had leaned down to listen a little closer. Far from Willow Creek, in a city that never slept, David Collins sat alone in a tiny apartment. The walls were stained yellow with smoke, the floor cluttered with bottles and broken promises. It had been days since he'd eaten, hours since he'd slept. The noise of the city outside, the sirens, the shouting, the chaos, had long become background music to his despair. He was 28, but he felt older than his years, like a man whose soul had been left behind somewhere long ago. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the small silver cross his mother had given him, and turned it over in his hand. The edges had worn smooth, the metal dull. But when the streetlight hit it just right, it gleamed faintly, as if alive. He didn't know why he still carried it. Maybe habit, maybe guilt, maybe love, buried under too much regret to be recognized. He looked at it and muttered, "You really thought this could save me, huh, Mom?" His voice cracked, and before he knew it, he was crying. The sound startled him. He hadn't cried in years. Not when he was arrested, not when he lost his friends, not even when he nearly lost his life. But that night, in the dim light of his empty apartment, the tears came freely, as if something unseen had finally broken open inside him. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in a decade, he saw her face. Not the way she looked the day he left, but the way she had looked when he was a child, reading to him by the fire, her rosary hanging from her wrist, her voice steady, her eyes full of something he hadn't understood back then. Peace. He could almost hear her voice again. Every Hail Mary is a heartbeat, David. When you pray, you're not alone. Heaven breathes with you. He shook his head, trying to push the memory away. But the voice lingered, and beneath it, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Warmth. Gentle, steady warmth, like sunlight breaking through cold glass. Later that night, unable to sleep, he wandered the streets. Snow had begun to fall, covering the sidewalks in a thin white blanket. He passed by bars, closed shops, and faces he didn't recognize. The city was alive, but he felt like a ghost drifting through it. Then, as he turned a corner, he saw a small church. Its doors were open, light spilling from within, and faint music echoing into the street. He hesitated. His first instinct was to keep walking. Churches meant guilt. Churches meant memories. But something tugged at him, a quiet pull, like a thread tied around his heart. He stepped inside. The church was nearly empty. A few candles flickered by the altar. An old priest knelt near the front, praying the rosary in a low, steady voice. David slipped into the last pew. He didn't know why he was there. He just sat, hands in his pockets, watching the priest move his fingers over the beads, one prayer at a time. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. The words echoed through the empty church, bouncing softly off the walls. They were the same words he had heard his mother whisper every night through the bedroom door. The same rhythm, the same tone. He felt his throat tighten. He wanted to leave. He wanted to stay. He bowed his head. The air felt different here, thick but gentle, heavy but holy. And in that stillness, he whispered for the first time in years, so softly that even he could barely hear it. God, if you're there, please help me. He didn't know how long he sat there, minutes, hours. The world outside disappeared. When he finally looked up, the priest was gone. Only the candles remained, flickering quietly like small hearts still beating. He stood, walked to the front, and knelt. It wasn't dramatic. There was no thunder, no heavenly voice, no vision of angels. Just a man, tired and broken, kneeling in front of the God he had spent a decade running from. And in that silence, he felt something, a warmth spreading through his chest, a weight lifting from his shoulders. It was small, fragile, but real, a spark, a beginning, a light. That same night, hundreds of miles away, Mary Ann stirred in her sleep. Her breathing was shallow, her body weak, but her lips were moving. Claire, who sat reading beside her, heard her whisper, "Thank you, Lord. You found him." Claire looked up, startled. She had no idea what those words meant, but she felt it too, a change in the air, a calm that hadn't been there before. She reached for Marianne's hand. It was warm, stronger than it had been all week. And though the candle beside the bed burned low, its flame stood steady, unflickering, unwavering, as if even the wind knew to be still. The night was colder than usual. A pale moon hung over Willow Creek, casting long silver lines across the quiet streets. Inside the little house at the end of Maple Street, a candle burned by the window, its flame trembling but unbroken. Mary Ann Collins lay in her bed, her body frail, her breath thin. The doctor had visited earlier that day, and though he said the words kindly, they still landed like snow, soft, final, undeniable. "She doesn't have much time," he had told Claire. "Maybe a day, maybe two." Claire nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She had seen many patients pass, but none like this one. None who carried peace like a fragrance. That evening, Mary Ann asked to be moved to her chair by the window. Claire hesitated. "Are you sure? You need to rest." "I'll rest soon," Mary Ann whispered with a smile. "I just want to see the candlelight one more time." Claire helped her sit, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and placed the rosary in her trembling hands. For a while, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the soft ticking of the clock and the gentle murmur of her breathing. Then Mary Ann broke the silence. "Claire," she said softly, "do you know why I've prayed every night for 10 years? Claire shook her head. "Because I believe that love is never wasted. Every prayer, every tear, they don't disappear. They become light, and that light always finds its way home." Her eyes glistened in the candlelight. She looked beyond the window, as if seeing something only heaven could show her. Hours passed. The world outside grew quiet, the snow beginning to fall again, soft, steady, endless. Mary Ann began to pray, her voice barely a whisper now, each word floating into the stillness like a feather. "Our Father, who art in heaven." Claire joined her, her own voice breaking. And together they moved through the decades, one beat at a time. By the fourth decade, Marianne's voice began to fade. Her breathing slowed. Her eyelids fluttered. Claire leaned closer. "Mrs. Collins," she whispered, "would you like me to stop?" Marianne shook her head faintly. "No, dear, just help me finish the last one. The last prayer." Together, they whispered the final Hail Mary. "Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus." The words wavered, then steadied. "Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death." Marianne took a breath, a long, trembling breath, and whispered,
She would be so
Amen.
proud.
Her head tilted gently against the back of the chair, her lips curved into the faintest smile. And for the first time in years, her body was completely still. Claire froze. The clock ticked once, twice, and then the candlelight flared, bright, golden, pure. A fragrance filled the room, roses, sweet and unmistakable. Tears spilled down Claire's cheeks. She knelt beside the chair, held Marianne's hand, and whispered, "You did it. You finished your prayer." Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the little house in silence. And though the night was cold, the air inside felt warm, alive, as if heaven itself had opened its doors to welcome home the woman who had prayed without ceasing. That same moment, hundreds of miles away, David woke suddenly in his small apartment. He sat upright, gasping for air, heart racing, chest tight, as though someone had called his name from across eternity. He didn't know why, but he reached instinctively for the rosary cross in his pocket. It was warm, hot even, as if it had been held by unseen hands. He pressed it to his forehead and whispered, "Mom?" The word felt strange, familiar, sacred, like a prayer he'd forgotten he knew. A tear slid down his cheek. He closed his eyes and held the cross tightly. And in that silence, he felt it. A peace that wrapped around him like a blanket. He didn't know that at that very moment, his mother's soul was stepping into light, that her last prayer had found its way to him. Back in Willow Creek, the candle by the window burned brighter than it ever had before. And when it finally went out, it left behind not darkness, but the faint scent of roses, lingering in the air like the echo of a mother's voice saying, "I'm still here."
May all beings.
The night Marianne Collins took her final breath, heaven did not roar with thunder. There were no flashes of light, no trumpets, no visions to fill the sky. Just stillness. Soft, sacred stillness. And in that stillness, something unseen began to move. The candle by her window, the same candle she had lit every night for 10 years, flared once more before it went out. Its light did not fade, it traveled. Out through the glass, through the falling snow, over the sleeping town, and into the dark miles beyond. In a city alley half a country away, David Collins sat shivering, his back pressed against a crumbling brick wall. He didn't know why he had gone there that night. He had left his apartment hours earlier, restless, searching for something he couldn't name. The air was heavy, his breath visible in the cold, his thoughts loud and cruel. He wanted to believe the small warmth he'd felt earlier in the church was real, but the darkness was persuasive. It whispered that redemption wasn't for people like him. He closed his eyes and whispered into the void, "I don't even know how to pray anymore." The silence answered. Then, from somewhere deep within the silence, a scent reached him. Faint, sweet, impossible. Roses. He opened his eyes. There were no flowers, no gardens, just the damp alley and the hum of a streetlight. Yet the scent grew stronger, as if carried by a breeze that didn't belong to this world. He felt a warmth spreading through the air. He looked down. The small rosary cross in his hand was glowing, not with fire, not with heat, with light, soft, golden, pure. He blinked, thinking his tired eyes were playing tricks. But the light stayed, and with it came something else. A voice. Not out loud, not from the air, but from within. "David, my son." He froze. He knew that voice. He had heard it in his dreams, in his memories, in the soft whispers of childhood when his mother would tuck him in and say, "God never forgets his children." He looked around, his breath catching. "Mom?" he whispered. And though there was no one there, he felt it. A hand on his shoulder, gentle and warm. Then the voice again, so tender it broke him open. "Don't be afraid. You were never lost. You were always on your way home." Tears spilled down his face. He fell to his knees on the cold, wet pavement. The light from the rosary spread outward, reflecting in puddles, glowing against the dark brick walls. And as he sobbed, his lips began to move. Not in confusion or anger, but in prayer. "Hail Mary, full of grace." The words stumbled at first. He didn't remember all of them. But somehow, they came back, as if his mother were whispering them alongside him. When he reached the final amen, the wind rose, a sudden, soft gust that carried warmth through the alley. He lifted his eyes. The snow was falling again, but each flake glowed faintly, like tiny sparks of light drifting down from heaven. He laughed through tears, a sound half sob, half joy. He hadn't felt joy in years. At that exact moment, the clock in Marianne's house struck 3. Claire, who had fallen asleep in the chair beside the empty bed, woke suddenly to the scent of roses. She sat up, startled, and saw the candle. It had reignited itself. The flame burned steady, its light golden, and for a heartbeat, she thought she saw something in the glow, a figure, radiant and gentle, smiling. And though the room was silent, she heard words in her heart. "He's home." Back in the city, David stood slowly, still clutching the glowing cross. The scent of roses lingered in the cold air. The light began to fade, but the warmth remained, a warmth that filled him from within, melting years of bitterness and shame. He looked at the sky, clear now, stars shimmering above the city lights. "Thank you," he whispered. He didn't know if he was speaking to God, to his mother, or to both. Maybe it didn't matter, because for the first time he believed they were listening. Later, when he returned home, he noticed something strange. The clock on his wall had stopped, frozen at exactly 3 a.m. He didn't understand the significance until months later, when Claire finally reached out to him through a letter.
Thank you.
"I was with your mother when she passed. It was peaceful, holy. She whispered your name at 3 that morning and smiled as she left this world. I thought you should know." He read that line over and over, his tears falling onto the page. The same hour, the same peace, the same roses. A mother's last prayer, answered the moment her soul touched heaven. David kept that letter folded inside his Bible for the rest of his life. He carried the rosary everywhere he went, its glow long gone, but its power never fading. Because he knew now what his mother had always known. Miracles don't always shout. Sometimes they whisper. Spring came late that year. The snow melted slowly, revealing the first green shoots of life along the edges of the road. For the first time in more than a decade, David Collins boarded a bus heading west, back to the town he had sworn he'd never see again. He carried a small bag, a folded letter, and a rosary wrapped carefully in cloth. That was all. The trip took 12 hours. He spent most of it staring out the window, watching towns and fields drift by, each mile bringing both dread and longing. He didn't know what waited for him at the end of the road. Part of him hoped for an empty house, a clean slate. Part of him prayed, silently, that somehow she would still be there, in some way that only faith could explain. When the bus pulled into Willow Creek, the town looked smaller than he remembered. The same church spire rose above the trees. The same narrow streets wound between old houses. He walked slowly, his heart pounding harder with every step. The closer he came to Maple Street, the heavier the air felt, like walking through memory itself. And then he saw it, the house, the porch, the small window by which his mother had prayed every night. He stopped at the gate, his throat tight, his hands shaking. The front door opened before he could knock. A woman stepped out, older now, hair tied back, eyes kind and familiar. "David?" she asked softly. He recognized her voice at once. "Claire?" She nodded, tears filling her eyes. "I knew you'd come." Inside, the house was quiet. Nothing had changed. The same lace curtains hung by the window, the same crucifix on the wall, the same scent of lavender and candle wax lingering in the air. David stood in the middle of the room, looking around like a man walking through a dream. "Everything's just as she left it," Claire said. "I couldn't bring myself to move anything." He turned slowly, his gaze falling on the small table by the window. There, beside a framed photograph of him as a boy, lay the rosary. His knees gave out. He sank to the floor, tears spilling freely. He reached out, hands trembling, and lifted the rosary. It was warm. The cross gleamed faintly in the afternoon light. And for a moment, he could smell it. Roses. Faint, but unmistakable. He pressed it to his chest and whispered, "I'm home, Mom." Claire knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "She prayed for you every night," she said softly. "Right here, even on the nights she could barely breathe." David nodded, his voice breaking. "I felt it. The night she died, I didn't know what it was, but I felt something. I think she reached me." Claire smiled through tears. "She did. She always said her prayers would find you, no matter how far you ran." Later, as the sun began to set, they sat together by the window. The same candle that had burned through years of prayers stood ready. David lit it. The flame caught, small and steady. He picked up the rosary and began to pray aloud. Claire joined him. Her voice was quiet, but sure. For the first time since his mother's passing, the house was filled with the sound of prayer again. The words rose like soft music, each Hail Mary a thread weaving heaven and earth back together. As they prayed, David felt a breeze move through the room.
You're still here, Mom.
The curtains fluttered, though the window was closed. The flame of the candle flickered, then steadied, and the scent of roses returned, stronger this time. Claire looked up, eyes wide. "Do you smell that?" David nodded, smiling through tears.
Mary?
"She's here."
Michael?
When the final amen left his lips, the air seemed to glow, not with fire or light, but with peace, a deep, golden stillness that wrapped around them both. For the first time in years, David felt whole. The guilt, the shame, the fear, they were still there, but lighter, transformed into something holy. He looked at the photograph on the table, his mother's gentle smile frozen in time, and whispered, "Thank you. You never stopped praying. And now, neither will I." That night, as he prepared to leave, Claire handed him a small envelope. "She wrote this months before she passed," she said. "She told me to give it to you if you ever came back." He opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a single line, written in her familiar script. "My prayer was never that you'd find your way to me, but that you'd find your way to him." Tears blurred his vision. He folded the note, placed it inside his Bible, and looked around the house one last time. The candle by the window still burned. The rosary still gleamed. And somewhere in the quiet between heartbeats, he felt her there. Not as memory, but as presence. That night, as he stepped outside, the stars above Willow Creek shone brighter than he had ever seen them. The wind carried the faint scent of roses through the street, and the old church bell rang in the distance, slow, gentle, like a benediction. David turned toward the sound, his heart steady, his steps sure. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Because faith, he realized, doesn't point you backward. It always leads you home. The rosary that once rested in Marianne Collins' hands now lay in the palms of her son. It had traveled through grief, through time, through the silence between heaven and earth, and somehow it had found its way home. Its wooden beads were smooth now, worn by years of touch and tears. The silver cross still bore faint scratches, but when the light struck it, it shimmered, softly, like moonlight through stained glass. To anyone else, it was just an old piece of jewelry, a relic of sentiment. But to David, it was alive. He didn't know exactly when it happened, when the rosary stopped being a reminder of loss and became a reminder of love. He carried it everywhere, not as protection, but as presence. When he felt weak, he touched the beads and remembered her hands. When he felt doubt, he whispered the first few words of the prayer, and peace would settle over him like a warm blanket. Sometimes he caught himself smiling. "Guess you're still teaching me how to pray, Mom." And in those moments, he realized the truth that had always been there, that faith is never inherited, it's awakened. One afternoon, as he sat outside the small church in Willow Creek, Father O'Reilly, the same priest who had known his mother, joined him on the bench. They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun drift through the clouds. The priest nodded toward the rosary in David's hand. "She never went anywhere without it." David smiled. "I know, now I understand why." Father O'Reilly looked at him kindly. "Do you?" David turned the beads slowly between his fingers. "I used to think it was magic, that if she prayed enough, God would owe her something. But now I know it wasn't about changing God. It was about changing herself and me. The priest nodded, pleased. She once told me something I never forgot, he said. She said, the rosary isn't a chain that binds us, it's the thread that connects us to heaven. David looked down at the beads, his eyes soft. She was right. Over the next few years, David began leading rosary groups at the church. At first, he thought no one would come. But word spread about the man who prayed with such quiet conviction that people left feeling lighter, changed somehow. He didn't preach, he just told his story. About his mother, her prayers, her candle by the window. He never exaggerated, never dramatized. He simply said, she prayed when no one believed, and that's why I'm here today. People listened, and they believed. One evening after a rosary prayer service, a young woman approached him. Her name was Emily. She was crying. My brother's been gone for years, she said. I don't even know if he's alive. How did your mother keep praying when there was no hope left? David paused. Then he placed the rosary in her hands. She didn't pray because she saw hope, he said softly. She prayed because she became it. Emily looked down at the beads, her tears falling onto the cross. Will it work for me too? David smiled gently. It's not a spell. It's a conversation. Start it, and you'll find he's been waiting for you all along. That night, David sat by the same window his mother once knelt beside. The candle flickered beside him. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees. He began to pray again, slowly, reverently, as if each word carried both his voice and hers. Our Father, who art in heaven. He paused, then whispered, I know you're there. I've always known. Thank you for finding me through her. As he continued, something shifted. The air grew warm, the candle flame steadied, and for a brief moment, he smelled it again. Roses. He smiled through tears. Good night, Mom. The rosary had become more than beads and prayers. It was a bridge between past and present, earth and heaven, mother and son. And though his mother's hands no longer held it, her faith still did. Because true prayer doesn't end when the words stop. It lives on in those who were changed by it. Years later, when David himself grew old, he left the rosary on the same table by the window. Beside it, he wrote a note. This rosary has already saved one soul. Let it find another. And when his granddaughter, little Mary Ann, found it years later, she picked it up, held it close, and whispered, teach me how to pray. And somewhere beyond the veil of time, two voices, one old, one young, rose together in the same rhythm that has never ceased since the world began. The years after his mother's passing reshaped David Collins in ways no sermon ever could. He did not become a preacher, nor a man of grand speeches and bright lights. He became something quieter, a witness. He spoke little of himself, but when he did, he always began the same way. I once thought faith was for the lucky. Then I learned it's for the lost. Those who heard him never forgot it, because when David spoke, there was truth in his voice. The kind that comes only from having walked through darkness and still found the light. He continued to live in Willow Creek. He worked at the small hardware store by day, and in the evenings, he opened the church doors for anyone who needed to pray. Sometimes he found himself sitting alone in the pews long after everyone else had gone, the candlelight flickering across the worn wood of the altar. He didn't ask for anything anymore. He just gave thanks. For mercy, for time, for the mother whose faith had saved him when nothing else could. People began coming to him, not for money or advice, but for peace. There was the young mother who had lost her child, the old man who hadn't been to church in 40 years, the addict who wanted to believe God still cared. He didn't promise them miracles. He just handed them rosaries. Each one a reminder that grace isn't earned, it's received. And when people asked if prayer really worked, he would smile and say, it worked on me. That's enough proof. One Sunday, during Mass, Father O'Reilly invited him to speak to the congregation. David hesitated. He never liked crowds, but the priest smiled. Sometimes the gospel is told best by those who've lived it. So David stood before the small parish, his hands trembling slightly as he looked out at the faces, some hopeful, some weary, all waiting. He took a breath. I spent years believing God had forgotten me, he began. But he hadn't. He was just waiting for me to stop running. He told them about his mother, about her candle, her prayers, her last night. He told them about the scent of roses, the warmth in the darkness, the way heaven had found him when he least deserved it. And when he finished, the church was silent. Not the silence of disbelief, but of awe. In that moment, something in the room shifted, a heaviness lifted. People wept quietly. Some knelt. Some reached for their own rosaries. It was as if the same spirit that had filled Mary Ann's small house had now filled the church. Afterward, Father O'Reilly took his hand and said, "Your mother's prayers didn't end with her. They're still working, through you." David smiled. I think that's what she wanted all along. The years moved gently after that. He grew older, his hair grayer, his steps slower. But his faith never faded. He kept the same candle by the window, lighting it every night at 7. And every time he prayed, he could almost feel her beside him. Not as memory, but as presence. When people asked why he still prayed the rosary after all these years, he would answer simply, because heaven still listens. One night, long after the church bells had gone silent, he sat alone by the window. The candle burned low. The rosary hung loosely in his fingers. He looked at the sky, stars scattered across the dark like tiny promises. And he whispered, "Lord, I don't know how many prayers I have left, but if they can still reach someone, let them." He smiled. "Let them find the lost, like hers found me." The flame flickered, then steadied. He closed his eyes, and in that stillness, he heard her voice again, soft, clear, eternal. "I'm proud of you, my son." When David passed away years later, the townspeople said the candle by his window never went out, and the scent of roses lingered in the house for days. His granddaughter, little Mary Ann, found his rosary resting beside a note. If you ever forget how to find God, just start where I did, with one Hail Mary. She held the rosary close, the way her grandfather once had, and whispered, "Hail Mary, full of grace." And somewhere beyond time, 3 voices, grandmother, son, and child, rose together. Not in sorrow, but in harmony. Faith, you see, isn't something you inherit. It's something you awaken, again and again, generation after generation. And sometimes, it takes just one prayer, one candle, one mother's love to keep that flame alive forever. They say time heals all wounds. But maybe it isn't time that heals. Maybe it's love, the kind that keeps praying long after the voice has gone quiet. In the end, the story of Mary Ann Collins wasn't just about a miracle. It was about a truth, that faith isn't measured by what we see, but by what we choose to believe when we see nothing at all. Her candle burned through 10 winters, her prayers stretched across 10 silent years, and her final breath carried a love strong enough to bring her son home from the edge of despair. Some would call that coincidence. Others might call it grace. But in heaven's language, there's no such thing as coincidence, only timing. When we speak to God, we often expect thunder, light, answers. But most of the time, he answers in whispers, through the warmth in a stranger's kindness, through the peace that comes after tears, through the scent of roses in a room where grief once lived. Mary Ann never saw the outcome of her prayers, not with her earthly eyes. But heaven let her hear them being answered, one heartbeat at a time. And perhaps that is the most beautiful truth of all, that faith does not demand sight, only surrender. Today, her story lives on, not in books, not in cathedrals, but in hearts like yours and mine. Every time someone kneels in prayer, every time a hand reaches for the rosary, every time a mother whispers her child's name before sleep, her story continues. Because faith is contagious and love never dies. Maybe you have your own David, someone you've prayed for, cried for, waited for. Maybe you've spent nights wondering if heaven is listening, if your candle, your whisper, your hope still matters in a world that feels so dark. It does. Every prayer you speak, every tear you offer is gathered, not lost, not ignored, but gathered like seeds waiting for the right season to bloom. The silence you feel isn't abandonment, it's preparation. And one day, you'll look back and see, heaven was never quiet. It was working. When David's granddaughter, little Mary Ann, knelt by that same window years later and whispered her first rosary. The same light that had filled that house decades ago returned. The flame trembled. The scent of roses filled the air. And somewhere beyond time, three voices, grandmother, son, and child, wove together in the eternal rhythm of faith. Hail Mary, full of grace. The words that had once saved one soul were now saving another. That's how God works. Quietly, faithfully, forever. If you've ever doubted, if you've ever prayed and felt nothing, if you've ever wondered whether heaven still remembers you, remember this. Every prayer counts. Every rosary bead matters. Every whispered amen echoes farther than you think. Because love never ends where death begins. It simply changes form, from word to light to miracle. Hidden God stories. This is where faith meets mystery, where the ordinary becomes divine, where a single prayer can rewrite a lifetime. If this story has touched your heart, remember, you are not forgotten. Your prayers are not unseen, and your candle still burns in heaven's eyes. So keep praying, keep believing, because somewhere in the quiet heart of God, your miracle is already on its way.
You've just uncovered a hidden mystery of God. Subscribe to Hidden God Stories to continue this miraculous journey of faith.